If you show up at the airport in 2026 with the wrong ID, the airline won't argue with you. TSA won't feel bad. The gate will close, the plane will leave, and you'll be standing there with a boarding pass that has turned into an expensive piece of paper because you trusted a rumor instead of a rule. And here's the darker part. The travel system is being rebuilt into a verification machine. Not just in the United States, but globally. Real ID on the domestic side. Electronic travel authorizations abroad, biometric entry-exit systems at borders, automatic refund rules that sound protective but are still routinely ignored unless you know how to force compliance. This isn't travel tips. This is a compliance environment. And if you don't understand the rules, you become easy prey for airlines, for scam websites, and for bureaucratic friction that always hits hardest when you're tired, late, and alone. Stay with me, because in a few minutes I'm going to expose the most common travel lie on the internet right now, the one that's making people panic about real ID and pay fake verification fees that don't exist. Then later, I'll show you the second trap, the authorization systems that look optional until the airline denies boarding at the gate. And before we're done, I'll give you a practical, step-by-step travel checklist you can follow for every trip in 2026 so you stop gambling with your time and money. This is Immigration News Desk, and today we're doing something the average travel channel won't do. We're mapping the rules like an investigator maps a security perimeter, because the perimeter has changed, and the people who get hurt are the people who keep traveling like it's 2019. Let's start with the biggest misunderstanding, because it's spreading like a virus: Real ID. You've heard about it for years, which is part of why it's so dangerous. Repeated deadlines train people to tune it out. They assume they'll push it again, or they don't really enforce it. That mindset is how you end up in a last-minute identity trap at TSA. Real ID comes from the Real ID Act of 2005. This wasn't invented because someone wanted to inconvenience you. It was born out of a post-9/11 security mindset where identity standards were treated as national infrastructure. The federal government decided that state-issued IDs had inconsistent verification standards, and that inconsistency was a security vulnerability. The solution was minimum federal standards for driver's licenses and state IDs used for federal purposes, like boarding domestic flights or entering certain federal facilities. Now, according to the timeline in the information you were given, the Department of Homeland Security set an enforcement date of May 7, 2025 for domestic air travel ID compliance. That means in 2026, you're not preparing for Real ID anymore. You're living under it. The question is no longer, will they enforce? The question is, are you walking into TSA with an ID that meets the standard? Here's what the requirement actually means in real life. When you go through TSA for a domestic flight, you need acceptable identification. The most common is a Real ID compliant driver's license or state ID, usually marked with a star in the upper corner. Not all stars look identical because states have slightly different designs, but the star is the common visual cue. If your license doesn't have that marker, you need a different acceptable form of ID. And this is where people accidentally solve the problem the easiest way without realizing it. A valid U.S. passport or passport card works for domestic travel. You do not have to save your passport for international only. If you hate dealing with DMV upgrades, or you're traveling through multiple states and you want one clean, federally recognized ID, your passport is the simplest tool. Other acceptable IDs can include Department of Defense IDs, lawful permanent resident cards, border crossing cards, and trusted traveler cards like Global Entry or Nexus, federal IDs that already meet security standards. The exact list is maintained by TSA and can change, but the principle is consistent. Federal-grade verification is the new baseline. Now, let's detonate the lie that's causing unnecessary panic and money loss. TSA does not charge you a fee for failing to have Real ID. There is no $45 verification fee, no penalty payment, no Real ID fine. That story is misinformation, and it's being used to scare people into clicking shady websites and buying services that either don't exist or are pure scams. What actually happens if you show up without acceptable ID? TSA can sometimes still allow you to fly after additional screening and identity verification procedures. That verification can include answering questions, presenting alternative documentation, and being subjected to enhanced screening. It can take time, it is not guaranteed, and it can fail, especially if your identity cannot be verified through their processes. So the real penalty isn't a fee. The real penalty is delay, stress, and the possibility of being turned away. That's why Real ID in 2026 is not a political debate. It's an operational risk. You either show up prepared or you gamble your flight. Now here's the first devastating mistake I promised. People assume the airport is where you fix ID problems. It's not. The airport is where the system enforces. Fixing your ID happens before you travel, at your state DMV, through passport renewal, or by choosing an accepted federal ID. If you wait until you're in the security line, you've already surrendered control. So your move right now is simple. Pull out your license. Look for the star. If you don't have it, book a DMV appointment or use your passport for domestic flights. And if you're someone with immigration status, understand this. TSA's ID requirement is separate from immigration enforcement, but any situation that increases screening time increases your exposure to stress and error. The best defense is not drama, it's preparedness. Now we pivot to international travel, where the world has shifted toward pre-authorization systems. This is a global trend, and it's not going away. Governments are moving border security upstream, meaning they want to screen you before you board, not after you land. That's why electronic travel authorizations exist. They turn airlines into compliance checkpoints. If you lack authorization, the airline becomes the enforcer because carriers face penalties for transporting inadmissible passengers. This is the second trap. You can be a perfectly legal traveler and still be denied boarding because you didn't complete an authorization you didn't know existed. And airlines will not argue with you at the gate. They will simply say, no ETA, no boarding. Let's talk about the United Kingdom's Electronic Travel Authorization, ETA. The UK introduced ETA for visa-exempt visitors, including US citizens traveling to England, Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. The key operational reality is this: you must apply before you travel. You cannot rely on doing it at the airport. You cannot assume you'll handle it on arrival. The application is online through official UK government channels, typically via their website or app. The fee is relatively small. Your source cites $10, and you'll need a valid passport, a digital photo, and a way to pay. Once approved, the ETA is electronically linked to your passport, and airlines can check it before boarding. Most applications process quickly, sometimes within hours, but usually fast is not a strategy. You apply early. Now, here is where scammers feast. Third-party websites that look official and charge 10 times the price. They market themselves as fast track, priority, guaranteed. It's the same business model used for ESTA scams for years. The danger isn't only the money. The danger is that you're handing your passport details and personal information to unknown companies. In 2026, identity theft is a travel hazard. Use official government channels. And here's a detail people miss until it ruins their day. Some systems can apply even if you're transiting. If you're passing through a country's airport, even without leaving the sterile transit zone, certain authorization rules can still apply depending on the route and the carrier's compliance rules. You need to check transit rules, not just destination rules. Now, Europe. The European Union's travel authorization system is ETIAS, the European Travel Information and Authorization System. It has been discussed for years, and implementation timelines have shifted, but the structural concept is stable. Visa-exempt travelers, including U.S. citizens, will need pre-travel authorization for the Schengen area once ETIAS becomes operational. Your source frames it as expected to become operational in 2025, with dates subject to change. So in 2026, you should treat ETIAS as something you may encounter depending on rollout reality and the exact timing of your trip. When active, ETIAS is expected to work similarly to UK ETA. Online application, a fee, your source cites £7 authorization linked to your passport, typically valid for multiple trips over a period like 3 years or until the passport expires. There are also fee exemptions for certain age groups under 18 and over 70, though the application may still be required. Again, exemption from a fee is not exemption from compliance. Now here's the critical part. Europe is also rolling out EES, the Entry-Exit System. EES is not the authorization you apply for beforehand. EES is what happens at the border: biometric registration, facial recognition, fingerprint scans, digital tracking of entry and exit. This is Europe doing what the US has been building for years, replacing stamps and manual logs with biometric, machine-readable travel history. So understand the architecture. ETIAS is upstream permission. EES is downstream enforcement. ETIAS decides whether you should be allowed to travel. EES records the fact that you did. Together, they create a closed loop, and closed loops are designed to eliminate ambiguity, especially ambiguity around overstays. This is not about fear. This is about what modern states are doing. They're converting travel into data. That data is used to profile risk, enforce compliance, and automate future decisions. And in a world like that, your best strategy is early authorization, clean documentation, and zero last-minute improvisation. Now let's pivot to airline policy changes in 2026, because the airline industry is quietly shifting its own rules, and airlines love when you don't notice until after you've paid. One headline change is Southwest's move from open seating to assigned seating. For decades, Southwest was the exception. Boarding groups, no assigned seats, the choose your seat system. According to the information you were given, Southwest announced a transition toward assigned seating, rolling out gradually. That changes how families sit together, how early boarding works, and potentially how value is distributed between base fares and add-ons. Southwest has signaled it will keep certain distinctive policies like free checked bags and no change fees, but the seat selection change is still a behavioral shift. If you're used to gaming open seating with early check-in, that era is ending. Now, battery restrictions. This is where travelers get trapped in a different way. Not by documents, but by safety rules. Lithium batteries, especially large capacity ones, are a fire risk. Airlines and the FAA have strict limits, and mobility devices, scooters, and powered wheelchairs can trigger complications if their batteries exceed certain watt-hour limits. Your source references a 160 wh threshold as a key line where special approval may be required or transport may be prohibited. If you travel with powered medical devices, you cannot leave this to chance. You must know your battery specs, you must contact the airline ahead of time, and you must be ready with documentation, because the cruelty of this system is that it doesn't care why you need the device. It cares whether it meets transport rules. If you learn at the airport that your mobility device can't fly, you're not just inconvenienced, you're stranded. Now, baggage. Most major airlines continue charging for checked bags on domestic flights. Fees commonly sit around $30–$35 for the first checked bag and $40–$45 for the second, with typical weight limits at 50 pounds for standard baggage. International routes can have different allowances. The point isn't memorizing exact numbers. The point is that baggage costs are a moving target, and fare classes can change what is included. Basic economy often looks cheap until you pay for seat selection, carry-on, changes, and bags. The cheapest fare is not always the cheapest trip. Now we get to the part most people don't realize is finally getting sharper teeth. Passenger rights and protections in the United States, especially around refunds. For years, airlines operated on a simple psychological advantage. You're exhausted, you just want to get home, and a voucher seems easier than a refund fight. The Department of Transportation has strengthened and clarified refund protections, including automatic refunds in certain situations. The core rule you need to hold in your mind is this: if your flight is canceled or significantly changed and you do not accept the alternative travel the airline offers, you are entitled to a refund to your original form of payment, not a voucher, unless you choose a voucher, not a future credit, a refund. Now, significant change is often framed in time thresholds. Your source references more than 3 hours for domestic and more than 6 hours for international as a common benchmark used in many discussions, though definitions can vary by policy and case. The important thing is the structure. A significant schedule change can entitle you to a refund if you decline the alternative. There's also the issue of ancillary fees, seat selection you didn't get, Wi-Fi that didn't work, checked bag fees when bags are significantly delayed. These are not too small to matter. Under reinforced rules, you can be entitled to refunds for services you paid for and didn't receive, and automatic means the airline is supposed to process refunds without forcing you through a maze of forms. Refunds are generally required within 7 business days for credit card purchases and 20 days for other payment methods, according to the guidance referenced. Now I'm going to open a loop that will save you money. Airlines do not always volunteer your rights. They often default to the cheapest outcome for them. Your job is to know the rule so you can enforce it. Later in this video, I'll give you the exact documentation strategy you use when requesting refunds, so your complaint becomes a case file, not a plea. For passengers with disabilities, there are additional protections: assistance at no charge, help boarding, stowing mobility devices, and specific responsibilities when a wheelchair or mobility device is damaged. If an airline damages a wheelchair, it must provide a temporary replacement and is responsible for repair or replacement. If you're traveling with a disability, notifying the airline in advance can smooth things, but the rights exist regardless of whether you gave notice. And if your rights are violated, you can file a complaint with the DOT's Aviation Consumer Protection Division. Complaints matter because regulators track patterns. A single complaint might not feel powerful, but systemic complaint volume drives enforcement attention. Now, let's close the refund loop with the investigative truth. The travel industry counts on your fatigue. Airlines count on you not wanting to fight. Scam websites count on you being in a rush. Governments count on you complying without understanding. The system is designed to work smoothly for prepared travelers and brutally for unprepared ones. So let's get practical. Here is what you should do for stress-free travel in 2026, domestic or international, without turning this into a complicated project. First, build a personal travel checklist you use every time. Same checklist, every trip, because the easiest way to lose money is to rely on memory. For domestic flights, you need real ID compliant identification or an accepted alternative like a passport. Check for the star on your license. If you don't have it, decide now whether you're upgrading or using your passport. For international travel, check whether your destination or transit route requires an electronic authorization like UK ETA or EU ETIAS. Apply as soon as you book, not a week before you fly. Print or save confirmation. Make sure your passport details match exactly. Next, passport validity. Many countries enforce a 6 months validity beyond your return date rule. That means your passport can be technically valid and still get you denied boarding or entry. If your passport is close to expiring, renew early. The U.S. State Department has expanded online renewal for certain applicants. Your source notes this, meaning in some cases you can renew without the old pain of paper forms and post office lines. But eligibility matters. Passport issued within the last 15 years, undamaged, adult renewal rules. Verify on official State Department sources. Then, fare class rules. Read what you're buying. Seat selection, cancellations, changes, baggage, carry-on. Many travelers buy cheap fares and then discover the real cost is hidden in restrictions. Then, special needs and equipment. If you have mobility devices or medical equipment, call the airline in advance. Confirm battery specs and transport rules. Document the communication. If your device is essential, you don't leave it to the day of staff who are just following a checklist. Then, time. TSA recommends arriving roughly 2 hours early for domestic and 3 hours early for international. You might think you can cut it close. In 2026, you can't, because more verification systems mean more points of friction. A biometric glitch, an authorization check, a bag issue, any one delay can cascade into a missed flight. Then, copies. Keep digital and physical backups of important documents, itinerary, confirmation numbers, key phone numbers. Phones die, apps crash, Wi-Fi fails. A printed page can save you when your screen goes dark. Then, trusted traveler programs. If you travel frequently, TSA PreCheck and Global Entry can reduce your time exposed to chaos. PreCheck is a 5-year program with a fee. Your source references 85s, and Global Entry around $100 for 5 years with PreCheck included and expedited customs return. They are not required, but they are friction reducers. In a world of increasing verification, reducing friction is a form of control. Now we have to address misinformation, because misinformation is the parasite living inside modern travel. Here are the red flags. 1. Extreme claims about fees or penalties that do not appear on official government sites, like TSA charging a real ID fee. 2. Third-party authorization sites charging massive fees for a simple ETA or ETS application. 3. Fear-driven content designed to create panic rather than clarity. 4. No sources, no links to TSA, DHS, State Department, or official foreign government portals. When you see these red flags, stop, verify, don't share. Because sharing misinformation doesn't just embarrass you, it costs someone else money and could strand them at an airport. Here's the simplest verification framework: TSA.gov for domestic ID rules, travel.state.gov for U.S. passport and international travel advisories, the official government websites of the destination country for entry rules and authorizations, and the airline's own website for baggage, seating, and device policies. Now, I promised you the refund enforcement strategy. Here it is, and it's how you stop being ignored. When a flight is canceled or significantly changed and you want a refund, document everything. Screenshot the original itinerary. Screenshot the change notification. Save emails. Note the time. Then contact the airline in writing if possible. Chat logs, email confirmations. So you have a paper trail. Use simple language. I am declining the alternative itinerary. Please refund the full amount to the original form of payment. If they push a voucher, repeat the sentence. If they delay, reference DOT refund rules and deadlines. If they still resist, file a DOT complaint with your documentation attached. The key is to make your request easy to validate. Airlines move faster when they see you have a case file. Now let's summarize the truth you need to carry into every trip in 2026. Real ID enforcement is in effect based on the May 7, 2025 enforcement date described. You need compliant ID for domestic flights. TSA does not charge a real ID fee, but lacking ID can trigger delays and could prevent you from flying if identity verification fails. International travel increasingly requires pre-authorization systems like UK ETA and potentially EU ETS depending on rollout timing, and Europe's EES will increase biometric border processes. Airlines are changing policies, seating, baggage, battery rules, meaning you must check your carrier's terms, not rely on memory. And passenger rights, especially refunds, are stronger on paper, but only powerful in practice if you know how to enforce them. If this video clarified what's real and what's fiction, subscribe to Immigration News Desk. We track the rules that quietly control your movement, ID standards, border authorization systems, policy shifts, and the practical consequences nobody explains until you're already stranded. And send this to one person who travels but doesn't do paperwork. Because in 2026, travel is paperwork, travel is compliance, and the people who refuse to prepare don't just lose convenience, they lose control.